Welcome to Never Too Early, a YouTube series focused on unconventional talent insights for founders. I'm Lauren Ipson, talent partner at Decibel. In each episode, we'll cover the top 5 commonly asked questions that we get from founders building their organizations for the very first time. It's never too early to learn from the best. I'm super excited to introduce my guest today, Sally Carson. Sally has led design at LinkedIn and Duo Security. She built Duo's product design function from scratch and has led numerous teams through hypergrowth to exit. Sally's also been a founder and is the most qualified person I know to answer the top 5 commonly asked questions that we get from founders building their design organizations for the very first time. Well, first and foremost, Sally, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. So I just went over your incredibly impressive professional background, but it would be amazing if you could share something fun about you on a personal front for the listeners.
Sure. I have just in the last 6 months gotten into bouldering, indoor rock climbing, and that's been a fun thing to have. People who have known me for a while know I'm a big time bicycle nerd. I'm a retired New York City bike messenger. I've done long distance bike touring across Thailand and the US. So it's very fun to have a new sport that I'm intensely excited about, and I'm a newbie. I think it's so healthy to have something new that you're not good at. It's like literally and figuratively flexing new muscles for me. So it's just been so fun, really fun to have a new sport.
I'll give it a whirl. I'll come join you.
Let's go climb. It's so fun. I'm always happy to climb with other folks. It's very social. Yeah.
I've tried once or twice, and yeah, I always think that it always looks as easier than it ends up being, right?
I'll make it look hard.
Okay. Okay.
Does that help? I'll be like, can't do it. And then you'll be like,
you and I together will make it look realistic.
Real difficult. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. That's a fun one. Okay. So today you and I are going to cover all things design. And we're specifically going to focus on the 5 most commonly asked questions that I get from founders building their design orgs for the very first time. So we're going to jump into it if it sounds like a good plan to you.
That sounds great.
Cool. First and foremost, question number 1, how should founders think about their first design hire, and when is the right time to start thinking about that?
Yeah, that's great. And I'll be speaking in generalizations. I'm assuming these are VC-backed startup founders. I think if we're thinking about hiring a full-time person, there's a lot of considerations, right? I'm a former VC-backed founder, so I have raised money. I have made hires with VC money. So you need to think about runway and burn rate and all these things. And how technical is your product? How much of that investment needs to go into data science or engineering? So I think that when you're iterating towards product market fit, to some degree, you can get away with working with contract designers sometimes if it's the right person. And I would encourage folks to make sure, if that's the case, make sure you're working with a designer who their subspecialty is startup, like 0 to 1, because that is like a particular unique specialization within the broader term of product design. When you're ready to make your first design hire, I think you should focus on product design first in those early stages, because you're bringing a first product to market. You're trying to iterate towards MVP. You're trying to iterate towards product market fit. So really hiring beyond that specialization of 0 to 1 startup designer, you really do want to hire a generalist, someone that can help you with user research, strong in prototyping, because that'll actually help save on eng cost. So someone who can help with concept validation without having to fully code something is helpful. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors that designers can do with highly complex functional prototypes in order to put them in front of, target customers and see how they're resonating or not. So very much looking at these things through that lean startup, lean UX kind of lens of what's the minimum we can do in order to test our hypotheses early on and kind of de-risk some of our assumptions. So that product design generalist that's skilled in some amount of just kind of guerrilla user research, prototyping, iterating towards, vetting concepts is very helpful in the early stage. I would say don't go straight into hiring your head of design executive person quite yet. It's a little early for that. So focus on the IC and hopefully someone who's I would say senior level IC, because you do want some professional maturity. If you're hiring a junior designer, It's like one way that's helpful to think about it is as a designer is moving through their career and progressing from junior to mid-level to senior, generally speaking, they're moving also from kind of surface level polish towards something that's more strategic. And the more senior a designer starts to become, and the more that they're incorporating user research, the more they actually start to look sometimes like product managers. So if you're able to get that sweet spot of like a skilled, experienced, professionally mature senior IC designer, um, because of the concept validation and prototyping they're doing, hopefully they'll reduce your eng costs, and you'll get more out of your engineers where you need them. And in theory, like you might be able to even augment your product team with that skilled designer if they're able to bring some of that user research, the things like competitive analysis and concept validation, things that can really help um, take some of the burden off the product manager's plate and hopefully be a very close, trusted partner and peer to your head of product, who might at this point be a CEO if you're a very early stage startup founder.
Yeah, totally. Something that I've found in hiring product designers myself is something that you just kind of spoke to a little bit, which is there's a really fine balance on the seniority side of things where you can, as a startup, get the exact type of combination of strategy and execution that you're looking
Hmm.
for.
Yeah.
And I have found that I've struggled sometimes because I've hired folks that were maybe a notch too senior,
Mm,
from bigger organizations like a
right.
Meta or like a Google, and they're very used to maybe working on one component of one feature of a
Hmm.
product
That's right.
and perfecting it.
Yes.
And so when you're in the early days of iterating and changing things constantly and pushing things that are far from perfect, it
Hmm.
can be a really difficult challenge for them.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I don't want to overgeneralize it, but I guess how would you recommend that our founders vet
Mm.
for the right level and the right type of person?
Like, don't get tempted by the marquee names like Meta or Google because the environment can be so profoundly different. However, there's some caveats there. Like sometimes there's like a little incubator team within a larger org that feels more startup-y, right? Or if you sort of found product market fit and now it's about like just growing the business, maybe like at the early stages, finding someone who had been on a growth team, which within a larger scale enterprise could be interesting. Um, and what I like about that specific specialization early on is um, those designers tend to have the muscle of being very metrics informed. So the build, measure, learn cycle that we want to see in early stage startups, because it's all about like testing hypotheses, de-risking assumptions. It's very experimental. Growth designers have that fluency, they have that language, they have that approach, as opposed to maybe the archetype you're describing is the designer who they might get 3 quarters to work on one initiative, really polish it. They're really into fit and finish. And if that's the archetype you end up accidentally hiring because their portfolio probably looks very polished and their marquee names are very impressive, um, you might find that designer is capable of shipping really high quality work, but they are chronically frustrated with the environment, right? Because everything, all their work's getting thrown out. They're trying to collect portfolio pieces for themselves. They have nothing to show for the time they spent at your company. Um, and this is why I encourage startup founders to hire that designer that is self-purported to be 0 to 1. So that's even something you might see in like their LinkedIn headline, or if you kind of look at their experience, you've seen this like there's some designers that there's like that archetype that just loves that stage. That like, how do we iterate towards MVP? How do we iterate towards product market fit? That's really where they've grown their depth and breadth of experience. Um, and it lights them up. That type of dynamic and that type of work, they really, really like it.
Yeah, cool. Switching gears a little bit, talk to me about the role of product market fit
Mm,
in the decision making process on whether to invest in product design
mhm.
or brand design
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, that's great. I would encourage, I kind of hinted at this earlier. I would encourage startup founders to invest in product design first. And the reason being, it's like we don't want to pour too much fuel into the marketing machine until the product is actually resonating with our target customer. So early days, we are iterating collectively and collaboratively, cross-functionally. We're iterating towards that product market fit and seeing what resonates. And there's going to be a lot of pivoting along the way. That's sort of inevitable. And once it's resonating and you have product market fit, then it's like you're kind of pouring the gasoline on the marketing machine to try to like fill the funnel and get more leads and all of these things. And then this is the moment where like the brand is becoming more important. Um, I think if you invest in brand too, I think it's tempting, honestly, for founders to invest in brand. And I think I even made that mistake myself as a founder, despite the fact that I was a designer, because it's kind of fun. You're like, we need a
Yeah.
logo and a cute name and a website. And like, there's some amount of that you need, but really investing it and perfecting it. If you've done pretty significant pivots along the way towards product market fit, the way you'll ultimately position it in market could change quite a lot as well. You might even find that it's resonating with an entirely different audience than you initially suspected. And that's going to have ramifications for the brand, right? So I would hate to see founders invest prematurely in brands before they found product market fit. I think if they have to choose one or the other, product design is the more worthwhile investment. That's time or money well spent. And it's going to be necessary as you're continuing to iterate.
So when is the right time then to integrate more user research into the development
Mm,
process?
yeah.
And how can it really benefit the portfolio or the company more
Uh-huh.
generally?
Yeah. At Duo, I invested in user research very early. I want to say my second hire, first I hired a product designer. And they brought me on maybe like Series B. They brought me on as a head of design to build out the org specifically as we were like just about to start entering hypergrowth. So maybe Duo was about 100 people, and over the next few years we'd go to 1,000. And first I hired a product designer, more junior, and I think the next hire, if I'm remembering correctly, was a user researcher. And the reason I did that was because so much of the product we were building had to do with just people's fundamental relationship with technology. It's a two-factor authentication app. So it's a B2B and a B2B to C. So we're like designing for the consumer experience, but we're also designing for the enterprise. And it's like there's this compliance piece. Like, are people actually using 2FA? Are they just dumbly mashing the accept button in a way that's kind of scary? And if so, why? So understanding all of the behaviors around password management, passwords, anything around just like security hygiene. I don't like the term, but like general like hygiene around your behaviors with security. We wanted to understand that at the consumer level because that was going to inform all these product decisions that we were making. And I personally had this belief that if you make that end user successful, that in turn makes that IT manager successful, that IT admin. So there was early rationale there. I suspect it's the case that a lot of startup founders don't have that same rationale. Like a lot of folks now are building purely B2B. There's not a B2B to C type of play. So it might be less critical in the very early stages. Um, However, just like if you're able to hire a designer that's more senior and they are helping to augment and support your product team, the same can be true for user research. So if you're finding that maybe your product team is underwater and but you're not quite at the point where you're ready to hire another product manager, it can be very helpful to have a user researcher there because they can take a lot off of those product manager plates, and partner really closely with them. I would say, I think generally speaking, second hire for the design team, I probably wouldn't advise that. I probably, depending on your ratios and how many engineers you have and things like that, I would want to keep the engineer to design ratio healthy before introducing user research. Um, but you can work with contract user researchers as well and get a lot of that, get a lot of bang for your buck out of that. Um, I think it's incredibly helpful because, and I would advise founders too, like sometimes user researchers get a bad rap for being slowing the process down, being overly academic. I think user research has improved over the years because of that feedback that they've gotten from their cross-functional partners. And generally they understand now that what we're looking for is actionable insights, and so the faster that we can like be embedded in a cross-functional way, work together quickly, build product. And the goal of user research is like, what decisions will we make? What strategic decisions will we make as a result of what we've learned? As opposed to, you know, 15 or 20 years ago, user research had the uh, reputation of like, the goal of user research is the 30-page
Yeah.
report at the
Yeah.
end that maybe no one is going to read. So I think user research is much more pragmatic now about the speed of the product development process.
Mhm.
But again, that's something you could vet people for, is kind of like understanding how do they embed with that product development process.
Yep. Okay. My final question for you. In the early days for a startup, should they be hiring for specialists in their domain, or are generalists a better way to go?
Yeah. I would encourage folks to introduce specialization later. Um, I'm trying to think like maybe at Duo, by the time we had a 15-person team, maybe that's the point at which we started introducing specialization. With the exception of, I think we had a UX engineer that I hired that started to build on our design systems early on. And that was to, I mean, one, just make sure that the product experience is really cohesive and that it's cohesive with the brand experience. Um, Two, to reduce the burden on front end devs. Like ultimately, a successful design system is going to reduce your front end dev costs, and reduce design costs as well. So there's some like efficiency gain there if you start investing in design systems. Um, Aside from that, so we invested in user research early, design systems early. But I would say, depending on the nature of the startup, your first few hires just being very generalist product designers, I think is a decent way to go, particularly because many generalist product designers that are more senior, they will come with some amount of user research experience. They might even, some designers love building out design systems. So there's a lot of like things that you can kind of get naturally by way of hiring a generalist because they will have their own interests that they tend to gravitate towards. So some of them might like to do some user research, and that will come through in the interviewing. Um, some of them will have like a natural interest in design systems, but they don't want to pigeonhole themselves completely there. So they like to build like an MVP of the design system, but then ultimately hand it off to that person who's more like the long-term architect of the system. So there's still quite a lot that you can get done in terms of laying the foundation for a healthy design org in the future just by hiring generalists.
Awesome. This has all been so helpful. I can't thank you enough. Yeah, I think that our founders are going to find all of this incredibly insightful. Any parting pieces of advice, words of wisdom to our founders that are building design orgs for the first time, learnings?
I coach leaders, so I'm always encouraging folks to be super honest when you're making a hire. Let's say it's the first design hire and you're hiring a senior IC. I would just be very honest about like, this is not a head of design hire. Um, you might be reporting directly to head of product or even to the CEO. Be honest about like where they'll be in the org. Be honest about how that might look different in another 6 months or 18 months. So the plan might be like, there's a lot of variables here. It depends on funding and things like that, but it's possible we will hire a head of design in another year and that will be your new boss. Like, I think just generally for leaders, like share what you know when you can, be honest about what you don't know. It really helps establish trust. And because our work is highly collaborative, relationships and trust that's a foundation for everything that we do. Um, and so just being clear about like, this is what we know, this is what we don't know about how your role may or may not change in the future as the company continues to grow. I think that's healthy because some senior ICs might say like, I'm the founding designer, I'm ostensibly the head of design, but if you haven't had a clear communication about it, they're going to feel really discouraged when you hire that head of design over them.
Totally.
Um, yeah.
And the head of design that might come in at Series B, Series C could very well be more of a people manager and someone
Mhm.
that can help with systems and
Yeah.
process way more than, the founding designer who is probably deep in Figma and
Mhm.
hopefully thinking about like more of the creative vision. So it can
Right.
be two very different roles
Yeah, that's
also.
right. Yeah.
Um, cool. Okay. Well, I want to thank you again for hopping on Never Too Early. This
Yeah.
has been
Thank you.
great, Sally. I appreciate you so much. And also, for what it's worth, Sally is an advisor to some of our portfolio companies and has done a tremendous job. So if you're looking for someone to bounce some ideas off of, or just want to get her take on all things design, can catch you on LinkedIn. Is that the best way to do it?
That's the best way. Yeah. Find me
Awesome.
there.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for tuning in to Never Too Early. More to come soon.
Thanks, Lauren.